All right, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us today for this very special webinar. My name is Matt Petersen, and I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Government Defined Contribution Administrators, or NAGDA. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, NAGDA's mission is to help America's public defined contribution plan administrators create successful retirement outcomes for their participants. We're very excited to be here today as it represents an important step forward for us in fulfilling that mission. Last year, NAGDA and the Employee Benefits Research Institute, or EBRI, created a formal partnership with the support of our founding partners, Capital Group, Invesco, and Nationwide Financial, that we're calling the Public Retirement Research Lab, also known as the PRRL or the PRRL. We chose the name lab very deliberately because we'll be experimenting with data that has never before been compiled across public sector DC plans. Our goal is to look at the public sector employee completely separately from their private sector counterparts because their situation is completely different. Today on the webinar, we'll dive into some preliminary research to show how the tenure rates and demographics of public sector employees differ from private sector, how those differences change over time, and what that means for plan sponsors and their service providers. A few quick things before we get started. We are recording this presentation and it will be emailed to all attendees and posted on the NAGDA and EBRI websites soon after we finish. The slides from today can be found on the webinars page of the NAGDA website. You will be muted for the duration of the webinar, but please submit questions for the speakers throughout the presentation in the Q&A box found in the menu at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will only be visible to me and the speakers, so feel free to send those anytime and we'll get to as many as we possibly can at the end. And now I'd like to turn it over to Ben Taylor, who will moderate today. Ben is a Senior Vice President and Head of Tax-Exempt DC Research for Callan, LLC. Ben is also the co-chair, along with Wendy Carter from Siegel Consulting, of the PRRL Steering Committee, a group that helps drive the strategic direction of this partnership. And he is a former executive board member of NAGDA and was instrumental in helping get this partnership off the ground. Ben, thanks for being here. Good to see you again. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Matt, for that great introduction and for kicking us off here. So for those of us who work with or administer government plans have all had the same experiences of having data from 401k plans and policy from 401k plans used to inform decisions about governmental plans. We're also all familiar with the same caveats that public sector employees mostly have access to a defined benefit plan, that public plans don't file 5500s, so there's a lack of summary data, and that things like the PPA are excluded public plans from safe harbors, or that a lot of features aren't available in public plans due to collective bargaining. All of these differences make it difficult at times to draw valuable lessons from the ERISA marketplace when we're looking at administering government plans. They also make it tempting to put on blinkers when analyzing a given retirement plan and its ability to help participants save for a dignified, secure retirement. As a result, we can commonly see completely uncoordinated evaluations of deferred comp plans, defined benefit plans, and even ignoring the presence of outside assets despite the high probability of their existence and significance. So the PRRL was founded to break down these walls and to allow government plans for the very first time to get a comprehensive picture of the retirement assets of their participants. I won't steal any thunder from my friend and former boss, Larry Lucas, in explaining how these pieces knit together. Rather, I'll just highlight that the government plans community is rightly excited about this quantum leap forward in our research capabilities and the opportunities we'll present for discovering how well a retirement savings system is working for about 1/5 of the national workforce. With the benefit of all these lessons, we can continue to make improvements in how we all work together to achieve our joint goal, helping Americans build wealth. So with all that said, let's set the stage first with respect to what we know today regarding the public sector worker. Then later, we'll hear from Laurie Lucas in more detail about the specifics of why we formed the PRRL and what plans we'll be able to gain from participating in the partnership. Now, to set the table by discussing his findings from a recent study is Craig Copeland. Craig is a Senior Retirement Research Associate at EBRI and conducted a study to compare public and private employee tenure. Craig, what did you find?
Thank you, Ben. EBRI has compared overall public and private tenure for many years, but in the PRRL study, Trends in Public Employee Tenure, the research was taken a step further by looking at the tenure in the various levels of government. This allows for comparisons of employees at the federal, state, and local levels of government to those in the private sector. As outlined here, this presentation will show the trends in the median tenure of these workers from 2000 through 2018. In addition, since the median only shows the midpoint, not the distribution of the workers across various levels of tenure, the percentage of these employees having or surpassing 10 years of tenure will be presented. Next, the median tenure of government employees will be shown to be higher across each age group of ages 30 or older. Lastly, the age distributions of the public sector workers are compared with private sector workers. The results of the trends in median tenure show that the public sector employees have maintained a decided edge in the length of tenure, as the lowest median tenure in 2018 among the public sector state employees had a median tenure of 6 years compared with just 4 years in the private sector. The median tenure in 2018 of local workers was 7 years and federal workers was 8 years. The other major finding from this slide is the median tenure of these workers have been relatively constant except for federal workers, where the median tenure fell from 12 years in 2000 to 8 years in 2018. In contrast, the median tenure of the other workers showed slight ups and downs within approximately 1 year of their 2018 levels. In addition to the longer tenures of the public sector workers, the percentage of them with 10 or more years of tenure is substantially higher, with 40% or more of the public sector workers reaching these levels compared with only about 1/4 of the private sector workers. This has been consistent since 2000, but the share of the federal workers with 10+ years of tenure did decline, but remains above that of all other workers. The longer median tenure of public sector employees could be just a result of having an older workforce, but the longer median tenure is actual result for each of the public sector classifications relative to the private sector once the employees are reach ages 30 or older. The difference in the median tenure is particularly significant when we look at those in their age 50s, when the median tenure in the public sector is no less than 13 years compared with 8 years in the private sector. Along with the public sector employees having longer median tenures, the shares of older workers working for public sector employees are much larger. Looking at the figure in this slide, the blue area shows the share of 40-year-olds. For example, for federal workers, 27.3% in 2018 are in their 40s. The areas above the blue are shares of the younger workers, those in their 20s and 30s, while the areas above the blue are the shares of the older workers, those ages 50 or older. As you can see from this figure, the areas above the 40-year-olds are larger in the public sector, 37.8% for the state employees being the lowest share among the public sector who are age 50 or older, compared with 31% for the private sector, while the area below the blue in the private sector is larger, where 47.7% of private sector employees are below age 40. Versus only 40.9% for the state employees, the largest among the public sector. The bulk of this difference for the younger age group is the 20-year-olds in the private sector, with them having nearly 1/4 compared with just under 1/5 being the highest in the public sector. Given that what these just described tenure and age differences and the strong prevalence of DB plans in the public sector, retirement programs in the private sector are not likely to be models in the public sector. In particular, defined contribution plans in the public sector are likely to have different appropriate asset allocation strategies due to the availability of the guaranteed income coming from the DB plan. Also, public sector workers are less likely to change jobs, so focus on issues such as plan leakage differ from what would be needed in public sector plans.
Thank you so much, Craig. I think this is a fantastic example of why this new partnership is needed. One of the main takeaways from this study for me is that the average age of public sector workers is rising. This seems to indicate several things. First, that this will change quickly as one generation retires and younger generations take their place in the workforce, so public plans need to be prepared for that generational shift. Pardon me. Second, it indicates that while public sector employees are older and more tenured, the length of their tenure and their age indicate a high probability that they have had opportunity to save elsewhere in other defined contribution plans or IRAs or other savings vehicles. Third, higher tenure infers that defined benefit payments will play a large role in the retirement outcomes of public workers. Fortunately, the data that will be produced by the PRRL can help us eventually sort out this confusing data picture. There are many reasons why I was interested in getting involved in this partnership, but one in particular was EBRI's unique ability to obtain and store data securely. To talk about EBRI's capabilities, as well as what plan sponsors should expect to learn as a result of participating in the PRRL, I would like to now turn to Lori Lucas, EBRI's president and CEO. Lori, is how EBRI is able to, how is EBRI able to work with our record-keeping partners to put this data together? And just as importantly, tell us a little bit about what you were excited about to learn from the PRRL and why.
Ben, absolutely. We at the Employee Benefit Research Institute are very excited about this partnership with NAGDCA, the founding Public Retirement Research Lab members, public plan sponsors, and record keepers to build and mine this unique public DC plan database. EBRI has been in the business of collecting, housing, and analyzing DC participant data since the late 1990s, when we built the EBRI ICI 401k database, the largest participant level database of its type. We now have, or are in the process of building, a total of 7 databases. And if we could see the slide, yep, we can see all of the databases that EBRI has. In addition to the 401k and public plan databases, we have an IRA, an HSA, and a consumer database. We are also building out an FSA database and a financial wellness database. And as you can see from this slide, they are all interconnected. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Perhaps what is most exciting about EBRI's research is our ability to look across our databases. That's because while individual level participant activity is never personally identifiable, the data are encrypted in such a way that we can link participants together across databases. If someone is in our public plan, consumer, and IRA databases, for example, we can see all of their activity together. This allows us to have a virtually comprehensive view of the financial situation of various cohorts of American workers. Further, EBRI's researchers have been doing this research on DC participant activity for decades. Collectively, they have roughly 100 years of experience analyzing employee savings behavior and producing fact-based, unbiased research to facilitate better decision-making by employers, providers, and policymakers. Now, with the new Public Retirement Research Lab initiative, we are in a position to extend this type of research to public sector workers, which is very exciting to us. The importance of this is underscored by the research that Craig just presented. Essentially, until now, a lot of public plan defined contribution research has been described, has been based on 401k data, essentially comparing apples to oranges, triangulating, and hoping the output is close enough to reality that it will be useful to public plan decision makers. But the Public Retirement Research Lab changes all of that. Going forward, we will be able to produce cross-sectional public plan universe reports that show actual participant plan usage. So this is not just survey data, which can be prone to inaccuracies and biases. This is actual participant behavior. In addition, we'll be able to produce U versus universe reports for public plan sponsors, showing how their plans stack up against other plans as they contemplate changes. Again, all empirical data. This is something EBRI has done for more than 2 decades with private sector plan database, or private sector plan database, and we're excited to do it for public plans as well. We also have longitudinal universe reports showing plan usage over time. And using our retirement security projection model, we'll be able to show how well public plan workers are doing when it comes to meeting their retirement needs, and what the impact could be on their retirement outcomes in terms of plan events like COVID-19 and policy changes such as the CARES Act. So it's a very flexible tool that we can apply to the database. In other words, the Public Retirement Research Lab will be in a position to produce in-depth research in a way that has never been done before.
This is absolutely wonderful, Lori. Like I said before, this is a total game changer for our industry, so we're really excited about it. You know, and as you mentioned, record keepers will play a very important role in this process, and so I'd like to get their perspective as well. We have with us today Brenda Anderson. Brenda is an Associate Vice President of Large Custom Plans at Nationwide. Brenda, why was Nationwide interested in this partnership?
Yes, thank you, Ben. Thanks for the opportunity to chime in here. And it has so much to do with what Lori just talked about. Nationwide's had the opportunity to work alongside EBRI on the private sector corporate space for many years now. And so we clearly see the power of the research and the analysis that EBRI will bring to our government sector will be very powerful. So that's one of the reasons right out of the gate. And I think we all know in this industry, we've been limited on benchmarking data and research up until this point. And as record keepers, we can all benchmark our own plans and participant data, but how can we make that broader? So we're reaching across the industry. And I just have to start out with gratitude to NAGDA for getting us started, if you will, in 2015 with the NAGDA benchmarking survey. That was a big leap forward to provide us with information within the retirement plans industry to really help compare. But what I see is happening now, as Lori just said a minute ago, we're going to go beyond benchmarking. So now we can take the elements of what we'll learn to this research and apply insights and where that's going to take us next. So that's what gets me super excited. I do want to call out a couple of clear benefits that I see from my vantage point as a record keeper. And the first one is we're going to make this easier for plan sponsors. So it's really just going to involve a simple authorization form. You complete that through the secure website on the NAGDA website, and that is given to the record keepers. We'll take it from there. So we'll take care of transferring and taking care of securely encrypting and hashing that data and getting it to this to the Public Retirement Research Lab. So that's the first thing. So you'll hear us talk a little bit around this, that we hope that means more plans will participate in the PRRL lab. The second is, just as I was touched on a moment ago, just the opportunity to partner with a data organization. That's what you get up and do every day, is you look at this data, you're analyzing it, you're pushing out research, and that will give us insights and trends that we can follow and that we can now compare in the corporate space to what we do every day in the government space. And then lastly, it's just your expertise that I'm super excited about. That stat, I hope you all caught that on the slides, that the confidence survey tracks 27 million households. I mean, that is just tremendous wealth of data that we'll be able to compare ourselves to and formulate more strategies that's going to help us in the retirement plan space. So those are my comments.
Great.
Ben?
Those are great. Sorry, thank you, Brenda. Those are great points. So I know as PRRL launched the first study on tenure that Craig reviewed, how is this type of data relevant for record keepers? I mean, for example, I know your firm has done a great deal of research on participants that are in different life stages and how that impacts their investment perspective and needs. Won't these data from PRRL enable you to expand that research and see how much general research does and does not apply to the particular experiences of public sector workers?
Yes, I mean, absolutely. That's a great point. And that's one of the reasons I love this tenure study out of the gate. And we at Nationwide, we're very much about tracking what is happening in that participant's journey throughout their career, those life stages, if you will, throughout their career. And, one of the ones that just kind of jumped out at me as we thought about the tenure study is just taking a topic like millennials. And how will the tenure study, Craig touched on it a little bit, but how will the tenure study show up and play out in the government sector? And then how we'll be able to compare those. So that's already been started for us with the tenure study. But I thought I'd just call out a couple points that resonated with me as we start to think about the power of what we're doing now with the PRRL research. And I know many of us have read studies on younger generations and their behaviors, and they're often viewed as job hoppers, in the industry. And one of the other organizations we look to is Gallup. And in the 2018 Gallup study, they actually show us that 21% of millennials have changed their jobs within the past year. That is actually 3 times higher than non-millennial workers. So that's one trend that's just kind of interesting to take a look at. I'm sure you know as well as I do that Gallup is a leader in employee engagement. So that's another place where we'll try to connect some of this research and better understand millennials and their high turnover rates. In fact, they call it, the researchers are calling it high turnover intention. So what that really means is what Gallup's tracking is about 60% of the millennials are essentially open to new opportunities, looking for new positions, and only half of them expect to even be at the same company or plan that they're at today. So what a couple of things that we're seeing from this research is that millennials are really looking for, or many millennials are looking for, what is the best value, the value proposition they're getting in their career. So where are employers helping me to have continuous learning? How are they investing in my own development and skill sets? So I think one thing that's going to be really interesting as we go forward is how will public sector and private sector compare in this area. And I have a hunch that we may see a higher retention rate in the public sector, lining up with millennial values and just the inherent job responsibilities and serving communities that our government sector members have. So that'll just be something that's different and unique around public sector that I'll be curious about as we go forward tracking this. So just a couple other points I want to make specifically about your question, Ben, around how we can utilize this kind of data. The other part we think about with millennials is the realities that they're facing. So when it comes to their financial decisions, their retirement savings decisions, has a lot to do with debt management and how they're going to pay off those student loans. So that's certainly shaping the industry. How do we equip millennials to make good decisions? How do they make priorities around which debt they pay off first, manage their expenses? And so that's really impacting how we in the industry are thinking about innovating new tools, strategy, education. In fact, I want to just cite a part of your studies, Lori, from the 2019 EBRI Retirement Readiness Survey, where you identified 6 in 10 Americans believe they have a debt problem. And that's a pretty high percentage. And then 7 out of 10 see that is directly impacting their retirement savings. So it really just ties all together how this data can help equip us in our decisions and how we're trying to shape the industry going forward for better outcomes. So that's just one example, Ben, of how I think PRRL research is very relevant, and the tenure study gives us a baseline to get us started.
Thank you so much, Brenda. That was tremendous. And just to underscore the point, I mean, I think this is a great example of what we've been dealing with in industry for so long. We have all these questions, we have general prevalence data, and now, thankfully, we're going to begin to be able to chip away at all those questions where we say, well, how true is that for our people, for public sector people in each case? So I think it's really exciting what we have going on here. So, you know, as we saw also, the creation of the PRRL provides opportunity to have premier researchers like Craig help us in understanding exactly who public employees are, but also to combine DC data with other data housed under EBRI. So as we've seen, employees often start in the public sector later in their careers, may have other savings, may have had other job experiences. So Laura, you recently announced a major partnership on consumer data, and you have several of the databases, as you mentioned earlier. Can you help us understand a little bit better the challenges and opportunities for the public sector employees and how these databases illuminate that picture for us?
Yeah, absolutely, Ben. And I think it's critically important to understand the power of the connections between these databases. So we have individual participant level data, and it is never personally identifiable, of course. We don't know who these people are, but it is encrypted in such a way that we can link all of the data together. And that is incredibly powerful. So a great example of the possibilities that arise out of linking the databases do involve EBRI's new consumer database, which we built with the help of JP Morgan. So that database, the consumer database, consists of 22 million consumers. And this database is now linked to our 401k database. So in fact, we've been able to link the spending behaviors of 22 million consumers with the saving behavior of 27 million 401k participants. Our very first research study, released in early June, explored our first question across these databases, which was why some people save at low levels and some save at high levels. And this would be impossible to understand without understanding the spending patterns of individuals. What we found was that very high savers, as you might expect, tend to just have higher salaries. They just have more money. However, surprisingly, low savers and middle savers salaries were very similar according to our research. But when you look at spending of low savers and middle savers, there are several major differences. Namely, low savers spend more on a few categories of spending, such as housing, food, and transportation. So now the question is why? And we're continuing this research to understand if the spending is more discretionary in nature, such as low savers prefer to spend more on Starbucks coffee as the kind of cliche example, or non-discretionary. In other words, maybe low savers have bigger families and have to spend more money on food, such as groceries. So understanding this pattern gives us a real important insight. It goes a long way to helping plan sponsors and others understand how to better communicate and help low savers. The possibilities for such research are really limitless. We could look at the spending patterns of people that are automatically enrolled and have automatic contribution escalation, for example. This has been something that I personally have been interested in for many years. Can they afford to be defaulted into plans at high contribution rates? Or does it seem to put pressure on people's finances when they're automatically enrolled and their contributions are escalated so that they are caused to take on additional debt outside of the plan? This is a very important question generally, and specifically to the public sector, where automatic enrollment laws vary widely, as you can see on NAGDCA's website. Again, results are likely to be different for public sector versus private sector workers, and we're excited to tease out these variations.
Thank you so much, Lori. I think it's just a huge opportunity for some really fascinating and completely new research that was never possible before. So again, underscoring the tremendous importance of this partnership. It's really important for us to keep in mind, however, that the person we are working with, working to help in this process is the plan sponsor. That's the entity that we're looking to help. They are the people making daily decisions for their plan that could be improved with a better understanding of the national picture. To that end, we're very fortunate to have with us today Mary Bonfilio, the Director of the Supplemental Savings Program for the state of North Carolina. Mary, from a plan sponsor's perspective, how do you anticipate using the PRRL, and how might this improve the quality of the decisions in the administration of your plans?
Hey, thanks, Ben. Yeah, North Carolina is very excited to be participating in the PRRL lab. Probably like many of the other large public defined contribution plan sponsors that are listening today, we've really worked to try to understand the governmental defined contribution landscape. And we do this primarily through benchmarking surveys. So we know that this information is really useful, but the Achilles heel of all of this work is the ability to access a representative peer group. We've found that that can be a bit of a hit and miss depending on what we're looking at, what we're interested in learning. So we're really anticipating that the PRRL lab will address the weakness in some of those prior efforts. You know, our board and our staff always like to consider what's industry standard and best practice in almost every decision before us. So we do know that that data is not always available, and sometimes it's not really as robust as we would like for it to be. But you know, when we start to think about our investments and the investment offerings within our plans, there's always a couple of really key areas that we take a look at. And again, this is where we think access to this type of analysis is going to be very, very helpful to us. That first area is probably in fees, right? So there's lots of conversation around fees. We're all very in tune to that. And the question we're all trying to answer is, are the fees in our plans reasonable based on the asset class and the strategy? But what we also want to know is, are they reasonable based on the size of the portfolio? So that's the great variability across plan sponsors, and really the heart of the question here, right? Is it an apples to apples comparison? So that's the first area that we're very much in focus and keyed on. Probably the second one is the investment options themselves. So as we look at this, we're really trying to answer the question, if for our North Carolina plans and participants, that we've got the right building blocks in place so that ultimately we're reaching that goal that we're all working towards, right? The retirement readiness of our participants. So where I think the PRRL lab will be really helpful is it'll let us see what our peers are doing, again, in like plans, apples to apples, and give us the ability to really challenge our thinking. You know, have we overlooked something? Do we have a robust lineup? Do we have too many choices? Is it time to kind of pare things down? And then probably the final area that sort of brings these two concepts together is glide path suitability. So we work with Prudential. We use their Goal Maker service. We have customized it to fit our plans and our participants. And so really, the more information that we can get to ensure that that's robust, we do have a good understanding of our participants. We know that they have access to a DB, but there's other things we would want to know, certainly things like tenure. And we know that all of that is going to go into enhancing the effectiveness of that glide path. So we're happy to be participating, and it'll be real interesting to start digging into some of the information and reports available.
Thank you, Mary. That's a really important insight about glide paths too. What would it do for the North Carolina system if you could receive a report that gave you a clear picture of the savings your participants had outside of the defined benefit and defined contribution plans that you offer today?
Oh yeah, that would be so helpful. So we gather some of that information today, but we know that if we had better access to more information, and again, I think another key here with the Pro Lab is it's not simply that self-reported, right? So we know that there's always a little bit of a potential for a hiccup when it's self-reported data as opposed to actual, on the records of our record keepers. So that would be very, very helpful. And again, go to the overall effectiveness of that glide path analysis.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I think that's one of the great things about this, generally speaking, is having the data come comprehensively from these databases and from record keepers removes the bias of self-reporting, which, as we all know, is really helpful, but is also a tiny minority of the people that we would like to send us that data, so we can really get a fuller picture without placing the burden on participants to help us out constantly in entering in the data that we don't have access to. Thank you so much for that perspective. Matt, Mary just touched on some of the specific data that can help in key decisions. Can you describe a little bit how the new benchmarking tool will help?
Sure thing, Ben. So as Brenda mentioned and Mary talked about a little bit, NAGDCA has been providing plan sponsors with a benchmarking tool since 2015. But we had a couple of significant issues with that. And one, as you mentioned, we have no way to really verify, even from the plan sponsor level, whether the data was accurate. We just get what we get. And the sample sizes were often pretty small. As Mary alluded to, it was difficult to find a real relevant benchmarking peer group. So through the PRRL process, we're able to solve for both of those problems. The first is the data transfer. Brenda hit it right on the head, that all a plan sponsor has to do is fill out the form on our website to express interest and link us to their record keeper, and then the record keeper takes it from there. They're going to work directly with EBRI to move the data. So that should help grow the sample size. It takes a lot of the work off of plan sponsors. We've been asking them for several years to fill out an Excel sheet directly with a lot of financial information. It's a big burden. It takes a lot of time. And I think it's limited the number of plan sponsors who are willing to participate. So we think this clears that up. The second, the participant level data is flowing to EBRI directly from the record keeper. And EBRI's world-class analysts are working to ensure the accuracy of that data. So that should be very helpful in helping us verify that we're getting the right stuff. Now, to be clear, the benchmarking tools that we have, that the plan sponsors will have direct access to, no participant level data is going to be available for anybody to have direct access to. The participant level data never leaves EBRI's secure servers. It stays there. Only the plan level aggregates are going to be available in our benchmarking tool. And each plan can only see their own aggregates and compare to a peer group. So no plan can see anybody else's individual plan data. That said, what the tool does allow you to do is to create a benchmarking group, a peer group based on several variables like plan asset size. So as Mary talked about, you could look in at your number of participants, what type of plan you're using, and so on. So we have a random example here on the screen where you can select several different variables and create your own peer group. And what that allows you to do is once you select those variables and create that group, if you go to the next slide, here you can see the output. There's a side-by-side comparison where you can see your plan, you can see the industry, which is represented in that peer group, and you say, okay, on these different variables, how do I stack up? How am I doing? And what is the reality of that group? So you can really, truly benchmark your plan against your peers. So this will be available to anybody who participates in the PRRL. As Mary mentioned, it will give plan sponsors access to information to help them make decisions in their boardrooms, in their committee meetings, to help them improve their plan.
Thank you so much, Matt. Mary, I mean, it sounds to me like that should provide you the information you're seeking and maybe then some. So I think it's really exciting for the plan sponsors that are taking part in today's webinar, and hopefully for all of us who care a lot about doing research in this industry, since it's so revolutionary. You know, as you mentioned, understanding when investments make sense in a public DC plan is very complicated, and we do have a couple of excellent professionals with us today who are working to help sponsors solve precisely that problem. One is Greg Jenkins, Head of Institutional Defined Contribution and Managing Director at Invesco. Greg, can the data from the PRRL be helpful in your approach to developing investment menus with your public plan clients? Maybe you could provide us an example or two of how?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Absolutely. And thank you to our audience today for your time and attention. We're also very excited about the PRRL project and what it'll do for plan sponsors. Investment menu design is an area that will no doubt benefit from the enhanced data and the analysis. You know, this information already exists in large part for the corporate market, but as has been pointed out, you know, many times in this program today, there's just so many differences between private employers and public employers and how participants behave. And now we'll have data specifically from DC plans. So let me give a couple of examples. Kind of an obvious one is target date. A recent concern among plan sponsors is participant behavior around target date funds. There's our own research and other data showing that DC participants tend to often mix target date funds. They tend to mix target date funds with core options. They also tend to leave target date funds at certain points in their career. And helping understand that for public plan sponsors is really going to be helpful. You know, and it'll be interesting to see if this is, if some of these things are strictly for private DC plans, or are these problems, or are there other problems that we can observe in public DC plans? So we're really excited to take a look at that. Another example is in ESG. This one's a little bit more forward-looking for an example, but it's a topic that is definitely picking up momentum, and we expect that it will be popular for quite some time. And many plan sponsors, when they're looking at adding or enhancing ESG options, you know, they wonder, what has the experience been? How many other employers have adopted these? Are participants using them? Is it strictly a West Coast thing or a millennial thing, or is this something that's observable across, you know, a broad swath of participants? So we can definitely help shed more light on that. Also, you know, people are wondering if ESG is maybe approachable from a risk-based standpoint. So with risk-based funds, you know, how has that experience been? And you know, public employers that offer them, what has the adoption been? So there's no question that we think that the PRRL data is going to be invaluable to helping clients, you know, understand and enhance their investment menus.
Thank you so much, Greg. I agree completely. I think it's going to be absolutely invaluable. And on that end, I also want to bring in Sue Walton. So Sue is a Senior Vice President of the Retirement Strategy Group at Capital Group. So we've heard a lot of talk today about the potential of this partnership, what kinds of insights could be gained to enhance the investment selection process with more specific plan information from participants.
Oh, and absolutely. I would love to pick up on a theme that Greg has already addressed regarding target date funds. We have long benefited from the analysis that EBRI provides from the 401k database, not only in how participants are using the funds today, but also the research and insights that we think would be critical in creating investment solutions for those participants, for our members, for our investors. The typical persona today is more reflective of that corporate or private company participant. With greater insights, not only would we be able to create better, more customized solutions, but also we can better partner with our plan sponsors. I mean, Mary raises a really important point in terms of understanding that suitability as it relates to target date funds and selection of those target date funds over time. So having that greater insight will certainly help us not only create better solutions for the people we are trying to serve to get those better outcomes, but also in that partnership with our plan sponsors to make sure that we are positioning ourselves correctly, that we have a good understanding, that we can meet the needs that they're trying to solve within their plan. So really a number of different aspects from an investment perspective that will provide some really great insights for us as well.
Absolutely. So thank you so much. And kind of following on to that topic, I think it's important for us to highlight the degree to which the public plan participant is changing. So Craig mentioned this briefly at the beginning when he talked about his research, but Craig, I do want to come back to you for just a minute. Can you tell us a little bit about what is the demographic trend for public sector workers right now, and how exactly is that changing, so we can look a little bit into the future from your research?
Yes, Ben, to kind of reinforce what you mentioned about the changing ages, we can see in this figure the 2004 age distribution of each of the workers for each worker cohort is added to the age distribution that we saw earlier for 2018. So we have 2 bars, can get 2 points between 2004 and 2018. Again, let's focus on the blue shaded area, which is the share of 40-year-olds. This share has fallen significantly during this time for each employer type by around 5 percentage points. And what's happened on the extremes is that we've seen that the older groups have gotten larger, those 60 and older, and also the younger groups, those in their 20s. Those are the 2 groups that have grown most. So that's taken the average age up for public sectors. But we're also seeing this increase of the youngest workers, those in their 20s, come about in the workforce now for both the public and the private sector. So this trend is overall reflective of the much larger sizes of the baby boom and the millennial generations and the smaller Gen X cohort, which makes up this 40-year-olds in 2018. As a result of this decrease in the share of 40-year-olds in 5 to 10 years, as the much larger share of the workers ages 50 and older retire, the younger than 50 age group will grow due to the small number of those in the Gen X 40-year-old when they move into the age 50 group. This has very important implications for the future of retirement benefits. First, retirement programs are likely going to need to encompass programs that look at the total finances of workers, such as emergency savings, student loan debt, and overall budgeting, as these tend to be important for younger workers. This can allow these younger workers to establish their overall finances so they can better focus on preparing for retirement as they age. Second, in the meantime, the public sector employers are in a transition period where a large share of workers are rapidly approaching retirement or actually retiring, while at the same time seeing the necessity of financial wellness programs for their growing share of younger workers.
Thank you so much, Craig. I think these are really important findings. Sue, when you think about the key findings from the PRRL Public Funds Tenure Study, how can we think about what that might mean for participant engagement to drive better outcomes across the generations?
Yeah, and at the Capital Group, we've certainly done quite a bit of research to better understand the generations that we have in the workforce today, what has shaped their perspective, what drives their decision making, and certainly how to best engage with them to connect on these themes. We certainly see that it's not only going to have an investment implication, but maybe a plan design, maybe an investment structure consideration. Our Wisdom of Experience survey really cuts across those generations and looks specifically at their investment experience, thinking about their financial needs, and some of the same themes that we're picking up here. So from the insights from the tenure study, we would have a greater ability to meet those public fund investors and participants where they are in terms of engaging them with the ultimate hope of driving, better outcomes and better decision-making process. So really trying to connect with the generations that we see and really putting that in the perspective that they're going to embrace and understand. So lots of opportunity there.
Thank you so much, Sue. And Greg, NAGDA members have seen some of Invesco's financial language research presented at annual conferences in the past. How will these data from PRRL help in those efforts as well?
Well, thank you, Ben. Like Sue, we're really excited about what this data and analysis will do to help our own research. One of the challenges with our financial language research in particular is that there's so many potential areas to explore. So many ways that our industry doesn't do a great job connecting with participants. And there's a lot of white space there. And each study is very expensive. And there's a limited amount of real estate, if you will, in terms of how much you can cover. And so it's very important to try to, frame this research to be most helpful for plan sponsors and ultimately participants. So the PRRL data is going to allow us to focus on some of those key trouble spots and some of those key differences. We already do some comparison with public and private sector participants, but we know that this will really allow us to uncover more of those differences. You know, a great example is, well, first of all, the tenure study alone is really a huge help for a lot of this work. And then beyond that, you know, we're getting a lot of questions about how to encourage participants to stay in plan after retirement. You know, huge issue for private and public employers. And we know that this is an area where, you know, public DC participants are going to take a little bit of different approach. We're going to need to discuss this issue in a different way. They tend to think of retirement differently, according to what we found so far. And so this data is really going to help us to help plan sponsors further, you know, encourage participants to stay in the plan. You know, we find that this research works the best when there's real world problems that we can identify that we need to try and solve. And so, you know, again, I think this is going to be incredibly helpful in order to bring those insights to plan sponsors in the future.
That's tremendous, Greg. Thank you. Mary, just curious, does that mirror your thinking from the plan side?
You know, Ben, it does, like probably like a lot of other NAGDCA members that are watching today. We have had the opportunity to hear Greg speak at prior year's conferences, and we have utilized the findings of that research. We do know that words matter, and we infuse this knowledge in our communications. I think every plan sponsor knows that getting those participants to act is the biggest challenge, right? Getting over that inertia, getting them motivated, getting them to take action. So really, the more we understand that audience and their responses to the language is critical. We always try to meet people where they are. We know targeted communications is the most effective way to go. So again, the PRRL lab is going to help us better understand the demographics of our defined contribution participants. How are they saving? And what is really our ability to more highly fine tune that messaging and to enhance the overall effectiveness of communication.
Thank you, Mary. I agree. I think it's going to really aid us in pinpointing all of our communications across plans. But, you know, one important caveat to all this is that, you know, you oversee several big plans. It's always important to remember that benchmarking performance is important to plan sponsors of all sizes, small plans, large plans, and everything in between. Whitney Carter is my co-chair on the PRRL and vice president and public sector DC director at Siegel, and a friend. We work on a number of things together. It's great to have you here, Wendy. Wendy, what do you think? Is this helpful to small plans as well? And if so, how?
I do think it is, Ben. Information sharing is one of the benefits of being a member of an association like NAGDCA. Knowledge is power, and the more data we have, the better able we are to identify industry trends, both positive and negative, and for all types and sizes of public defined contribution retirement plans. Having EBRI's data collection capabilities means we can streamline the data collection process, and it gives us the potential to collect more and better information from public sector sponsors, particularly smaller organizations that haven't been as well represented. The benefit of having survey data from a larger and wider range of employers is that it will give us many more data points to measure and to compare. It will be particularly useful for sponsors when they're evaluating changes to their plans. For example, auto features are the subject of considerable interest, and being able to look at the design and opt-out rates from more plan sponsors will help in the design and decision-making process. Matching contributions, the data can be sliced and diced to identify the different type of match designs on contribution rates. And as mentioned earlier, the investment fund lineups, how people are using investment options and how overall we can improve the investment results they receive, and ultimately they'll have more retirement income when they leave the plan. And then lastly, usage trends for features like Roth contributions, loans, or hardships will help us identify patterns that can lead us to understanding better how participants use these features, and whether design or administrative processes can affect the usage in a positive way, or perhaps more importantly, help curb negative behavior. Having information from plan sponsors will help not only identify trends, but what may be driving those trends, such as sponsor geography or the type and the size of the entity. Broad-based participation from sponsors of all sizes will increase our knowledge, and in the end, plan participants will be the ultimate beneficiaries.
Thank you so much, Wendy. Brenda, you know, Nationwide has thousands of clients. Do you agree with Wendy that the PRRL can be a resource to all of them equally, or would some benefit more than others?
Absolutely. Wendy, you were so articulate on how you laid that picture out there. I think there's so many benefits to looking at plan design, structural issues, new features that plans can consider. I just think those comments were just spot on. And to your question, Ben, I do think that this is going to be a really important tool, particularly for plans that may not have a full-time DC staff, a deferred comp staff. And some of our smaller county and city plans that are out there may not have that, that additional resource. So to be able to go to the PRRL and, as Matt demonstrated earlier, to benchmark it with plans close to your size and looking at trends and behaviors right there at your fingertips, I think that will be incredibly powerful for all size plans with us as part of the NAGDA organization. So I really would just like to close there. I think it'll help our plans of all size, our large plans, as well as our medium and smaller plans to have access to information that can be relevant to their critical decisions. As Mary was talking about earlier, I really loved Greg's comment about real-time issues. So I think as we get this baseline going, we'll be able to draw back on this information for things like what we're going through right now with furloughs and reduction in force and reduction in hours. So that'll be relevant as we go forward, how we then design and innovate and communicate to our employees when they need it most. So at the end of the day, I think we're all in this shared vision together. How do we help government workers to be better prepared, utilize everything we know across the industry to be better equipped and roll out the programs and the actions that will help participants to take action.
Thank you so much, Brenda, and thank you to all the panelists. Matt, I'm going to turn to you now. I know we have a few questions that have come up, and they've been excellent questions, so I'll have you address those and see if we can make sure that we answer everyone's concerns as they've been taking part so patiently. Thank you again to all of our listeners and audience as well. Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Some really good questions, and one that comes up often and came up here a couple times that is an obvious one. When I started exploring this partnership and started talking to EBRI, we got questions 1 through probably 1,000 were about security. And how do we do this securely when we're dealing with participant level data? So Lori, I think obviously you're best suited to answer this one. Can you talk a little bit about the security of the data and the agreements really at the record keeper level, like how those are structured to give the plan sponsor some understanding of how that is?
Yes, absolutely. EBRI's data security protocols are our lifeblood. We think about this every single day. Without the level of security we have, we could not have these databases. And as I've said, we've been doing this for decades, and we've built up layer upon layer of security protocols with some of the largest financial services companies in the world. We don't disclose who those companies are, but JP Morgan has gone on record as a partner of ours, and you can imagine the level of security an organization like that has. And we are in our data contracts with organizations like JP Morgan and all of the other financial services organizations we work with, we are held to the same standard of security that they themselves are held to. And to ensure that we have those levels of security, they will do regular audits of our our security protocols coming onto our premises and kicking the tires. We have our own security audits that we do on a regular basis to make sure that we are adhering accurately to all the requirements that we have. And I would like to also note that none of this data is accessible. It really has to be stressed that none of this data is accessible to anyone but EBRI. And not even all EBRI employees are allowed to access our data. Only those that have had the highest level of security clearance and need to access the data have any way of accessing the data. And they can never do so through internet access. They have to be in the premises to get access to our secure servers. And perhaps most importantly, we do not have any personally identifiable data. We don't want personally identifiable data. It's all encrypted data. And the encryption is not encryption that comes from EBRI, it comes from a third-party source. The third-party source gives the encryption key to the data provider, and the data provider encrypts that data, sends it to EBRI, and we re-encrypt it so that even if it went back to our data partner, they couldn't unencrypt it. And so that gives us multiple layers of security. From a plan sponsor point of view, it's important to know that the record keepers are the ones that are kicking the tires and making sure that the data is secure. And we have been working with these record keepers for years and years. Many of them are, record keepers that, many of the public plan record keepers are the same ones that we've been working with on the private side as well. So they are very used to working with us. They're very comfortable working with us. And they know that we hold ourselves to the highest standards, the high types of standards that they themselves hold their data protocols to.
Yeah, great answer. And one that's very important. There's more information on the NAGDA website if you're interested in looking at the partnership to understand in depth what the security is. But that's concern number one for all of us, for sure, is to make sure that this process is not compromising in any way to anyone. I think we have time for one more question. I think this was an interesting one. So we had somebody ask about, in DC plans, how do we think about percent of pay for retirement security? Like, what percent of pay are we talking about then? Or how are we structuring the conversation around retirement security? I think it's a really interesting one, and one that is the reason that we created this partnership. Is that's an answer that we can give in the private sector, I think, but it's very nuanced. So Sue, you have about a minute. We're close up on time, but do you want to add anything on that and why? Maybe that answer is a little easier in the private sector than the public.
It certainly is, and we think about it in terms of replacement ratio. And on the private side, we can make some assumptions in terms of what DC plans and Social Security would bring to the table. This kind of the standard out there, the common term around is 70% replacement ratio as it relates to ending salary, coming from both defined contribution and Social Security. The challenge that we have in the public fund space is that we do have defined benefit that does play a role. You've got defined contribution, you have other supplemental plans. And then, state by state may vary relative to that Social Security component. So with additional data, looking at these different plans, looking at the benefits across the board, we'd have a better sense and a better insight in terms of that guidance, that the consideration on what that percentage might look like. And maybe, Ben or others have, 30 seconds to chime in, but this is the opportunity for us to really hone in much more specifically on what that might look like, especially, different cuts across the safety versus civilian workers as well. So lots of varying components on the public fund side that doesn't make that answer an easy one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might try one thing just since you teed it up, and I'll hand it over to Matt, but that's right. We know that right now, from what Craig has said, people are working for their careers. If they're working for their whole careers, we're missing about 20 years of it for people in the public sector. What happened then? Well, let's find out. Now we're finding out. And we can add that number in because we know that the retirement income is going to be DB, what you see in these plans, and then everything else. And everything else we can now start to look at. And that's really exciting.
Yeah, well put, Ben. And hopefully you've seen why we're all excited about this partnership, but we're certainly out of time for today. I think we could all talk about it for quite a while, but I want to thank everyone for participating. Ben Taylor, Wendy Carter, our co-chairs, our founding members, Greg Jenkins, Sue Walton, and Brenda Anderson. Mary, thank you for being here to represent our plan sponsor community. Craig, excellent research. Thank you for that. And Lori, of course, with whom we at NAGDA look forward to partnering for a very long time. While much of our work with the PRRL this year has been dedicated to building the database, in the meantime, we're going to continue to provide insights on public sector DC trends. So next, we're going to turn our attention to the impact of COVID-19 and the CARES Act on public plans and their participants. So be on the lookout for that in the very near future. And with that, I want to thank all of you for attending. We hope you saw something that piqued your interest and helped you understand why we're so excited about this partnership. If you're a plan sponsor, the PRRL was built with you in mind. You're the key to its future success. If you want to sign up, there's a link in the chat box right now, or you can just go to the NAGDA website. There's a purple bar across the top with a button to click to fill out the form. That's how you get started on this project. You can confirm your participation today. We're leaving that window open through July 31st, but the sooner you fill it out, the easier and earlier we can get started on this process for your plan. So that's it for today. Until next time, have a safe and very healthy summer, everyone. Thank you for joining us.